Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We often look at the world and see this strict divide. On one side, you have science, psychiatry, neurons, all the cold, hard facts of biology.
And on the other, religion.
Exactly. Gods, demons, myths, the mystical. We think they're complete opposites. But what if I told you they're the exact same thing?
That the line doesn't really exist.
What if the gods are actually just projections of our own minds, and our modern psychiatric diagnoses, things like panic, narcissism, phobias, are really just ancient myths wearing lab coats? Today, we are walking that very thin line between the divine and the delusional to find out if we're actually in control, or if we're still just puppets of these ancient stories.
It's a fascinating premise to start with.
It is. And before we unravel the fabric of the universe here, I have a quick request.
Go for it.
And if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
So today we're exploring a work that bridges those two worlds, just effortlessly. It's called Psychiatria v. Mythos, or Psychiatry and Myth, by Dr. Creighton Dinsman.
And Dr. Dinsman isn't just some guy with a blog and a theory, right? We're talking about someone with serious credentials.
Oh, far from it. He was a real heavyweight in the medical field. I mean, we're talking about a psychiatrist or neurologist who graduated way back in 1948.
Wow.
He worked at the Istanbul Faculty of Medicine, but then he spent a significant amount of time in the U.S. He held positions at Monmouth Medical Center, Crownsville State Hospital, and he was a visiting psychiatrist and researcher at Johns Hopkins.
Johns Hopkins. Okay, so that's the Ivy League of medicine. That's serious business.
Exactly. But here's the twist. He returns to Turkey to work at the Bakırköy Mental Hospital and the Council of Forensic Medicine. So you have this man who is just so deeply embedded in clinical dynamic psychiatry.
The science, the research, the forensic facts.
Right. But he also wrote novels, poetry, and history. He saw the human mind not just as a biological machine, but as a story.
And that's really the mission of this deep dive, then, to see how our modern terms are rooted in these ancient stories. But specifically, Dr. Dinsman analyzes the power struggle between man and God that you find in creation stories. It sounds like he's tackling the ultimate question: is God real? Or did we just invent him because we were scared?
Or maybe, is God simply the name we give to the parts of our own psyche we can't control? To understand his approach, we really have to start with the foundation. Dr. Dinsman relies heavily on the analytical psychology of Carl Gustav Jung.
Okay, let's unpack that. Jung is the collective unconscious guy.
Precisely. Jung argued that myths aren't just fairy tales people made up to pass the time around a campfire. They are archetypes.
Archetypes?
Yeah, think of them as these universal patterns of human thought.
So it's like pre-installed software on a computer.
That is the perfect analogy. Before you ever save a single file or a photo, your personal memories, the operating system is already there.
It determines how the machine works.
Exactly. These archetypes are the operating system of humanity. And that explains why we generate the same kinds of stories, or gods, whether we're in ancient Greece, Central Asia, or, modern New York.
The geography or the time period doesn't matter.
Not at all. Humanity shares a single psychological DNA.
Which brings us to one of the most provocative parts of Dr. Dinsman's work, the Turkish cosmogony, the creation myth involving Karahan and Kishi. I found this section just incredible because it feels like a commentary on atheism way before the concept even existed.
It's a profound story, and Dinsman uses it to illustrate the fundamental struggle of the human condition. In the ancient Turkish and Altaic creation myth, in the beginning, there was nothing but water.
No earth, no sky.
Nothing. Just the supreme god Karahan and Kishi.
And Kishi literally translates to person or man, right?
Correct. And in this primordial state, they are both appearing as geese, flying over this endless water. Everything is calm. They're flying together.
Okay, but then Kishi gets an idea.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Kishi isn't content just flying alongside God. He gets ambitious.
Right.
He tries to fly higher or dive deeper than Karahan. He wants to create something himself. He wants to break the static peace. It's the spark of existentialism,
The moment man decides he's separate from God.
Exactly. So Karahan eventually decides to create the earth and asks for Kishi's help. He tells Kishi to dive to the bottom of the water and bring up some soil.
Okay, so Kishi dives down, grabs the soil, but, and this is such a human move, he doesn't give it all to Karahan.
Right. He holds back. Kishi hides a little bit of that earth inside his own mouth. Karahan takes the soil Kishi gave him and scatters it to create the world. A flat, smooth, perfect world.
But Kishi had a secret plan. He wanted to use the soil in his mouth to build his own separate world. He wanted to be a creator.
He wanted to be God, This is the ultimate atheistic or humanistic rebellion. I don't need you. I can build my own reality.
Exactly. But look what happens.
The soil in his mouth began to swell. It expanded and expanded until Kishi started to choke. He was suffocating on his own creation, on his own hubris.
He had to spit it out to survive. That is such a powerful image.
It really is.
The desire to replace God, to carry the weight of creation yourself, literally chokes you.
It suggests the human psyche isn't designed to carry that burden of being the creator. And when Kishi spits it out, that soil becomes the mountains, the swamps, the rough terrain of the world.
So the rough parts of the world, the suffering, the obstacles, are essentially the result of man trying to be God and failing.
And Dr. Dinsman frames this as the ultimate God versus humanism struggle. Kishi represents this human desire to be independent of the divine. But here's the crucial twist. Karahan banishes him.
Right.
Kishi loses his light and becomes Erlik, the symbol of evil, the ruler of the underworld. But without Kishi's rebellion, the world would have remained flat and boring.
The mountains, the valleys, the whole texture of life came from that rebellion.
Precisely.
So the drive that makes us sinners or atheists in the eyes of the myth is the same drive that makes us human. It's the source of our suffering, but also our creativity. We need the rebel to make life interesting.
Exactly. Total submission to the divine means a flat world. Rebellion means a jagged world, but a real one. And this pattern just repeats itself. We see the exact same dynamic in Greek mythology, which Dr. Dinsman compares directly to the Turkish myth.
Think about Prometheus.
Oh, right. Prometheus, the
Cool.
Titan who stole fire from Zeus. It's the same story, isn't it?
It is the exact same structure.
Yeah.
Zeus is the despot god, hoarding power and knowledge represented by fire on Mount Olympus. Prometheus, like Kishi, is the rebel.
He steals the fire and gives it to humanity.
He gives them consciousness, technology, the ability to create their own world.
And just like Kishi, he gets hammered for it.
Chained to a rock for eternity with an eagle eating his liver every single day. It's the same story. The gods hoard divinity. Man tries to steal it to become independent.
And the liver, what does that symbolize?
Well, the liver regenerating every day represents the cyclical nature of anxiety. Once you have consciousness, once you have the fire, you have the ability to worry about tomorrow.
Animals don't worry about the future.
But humans do. That's the eagle eating our liver.
And Dr. Dinsman asks a really tough question about this, doesn't he?
He does. He asks, in these struggles, Kishi versus Karahan, Prometheus versus Zeus, who actually won?
That is a heavy question. I mean, on the surface, God won. Kishi is in the underworld. Prometheus is chained up. They were crushed.
But look at the result. Humanity got the fire. We got the mountains. We got civilization. The myths suggest that human suffering, our anxiety, our punishment, our separation from the divine is the price we pay for consciousness.
We're suffering, yes, but we're free. We effectively killed the absolute authority of the gods to gain our own minds.
It's a huge trade-off, and it connects back to that Jungian idea you mentioned, that we all share this psychological DNA. Dr. Dinsman mentions the wolf archetype to prove this, right?
Yes, this is a striking example of the collective unconscious at work.
So in Turkish mythology, you have the legend of Asina, a she-wolf, who finds an injured boy, the last of his kind, nurses him back to health, and from their union, the Turks are born.
She is the mother, the savior, the guide.
And then you jump over to Rome, thousands of miles away.
And you find Romulus and Remus, two abandoned infants thrown into the Tiber River who wash ashore and are saved by a she-wolf.
She nurses them, and they grow up to found Rome.
Two completely different cultures, different languages, both believing their civilization started with a wolf nursing an abandoned child.
It proves Jung's point. These are not just coincidences. The human mind structures its history through the same symbols. Whether it's the rebellious creator choking on earth or the nurturing wolf saving the orphan, we're telling the same stories about ourselves.
So if these myths are the software of our minds, let's look at how they manifest in our glitches, our mental illnesses. This is the part of the book where Dr. Dinsman really starts diagnosing the gods. It's fascinating because he takes these clinical terms we use every day and traces them back to their mythological root.
It is where the title Psychiatry and Myth really comes alive. He shows us what the diagnosis really means.
Let's start with panic. We've all felt it. That sudden chest-tightening fear where you feel like you're going to die.
Today we treat panic attacks as a neurochemical event. We say your fight or flight is misfiring. But the word comes from the god Pan.
Pan, the half-goat, half-man guy.
Yeah, a deity of nature. He wasn't evil, but he was chaotic. He represented the wild, untamed world outside of civilization.
And he was known for being loud.
Very loud. The myth says Pan would scream so loudly in the quiet, hot noon hours of the forest that it would cause sudden, irrational terror in anyone who heard it. That is panic.
So it's not just being scared.
No, it's an overwhelming encounter with the chaotic forces of the natural world, something bigger than your ego can handle.
That is terrifying. It's not just anxiety, it's a visitation by a god. And speaking of fear, we have Phoebus.
Phobos was the son of Ares, the god of war. Phobos literally means fear. But he wasn't just, being afraid of a spider or a hype. Phobos accompanied his father into battle. He represents the terror that comes with conflict and destruction. So a phobia isn't just a quirky dislike. It's a remnant of a warlike survival instinct.
Then there's narcissism. We throw this word around a lot, especially on social media. Oh, he's such a narcissist. We know it comes from Narcissus, the guy who fell in love with his own reflection.
True. But Dr. Dinsman highlights a detail often missed, which is tragic. The tragedy of Narcissus isn't just that he loved himself, it's that he couldn't love anyone else because he was cursed. But there's another character in that story, the nymph Echo.
Right, Echo. She was in love with Narcissus.
She was, but she was cursed by Hera to only be able to repeat the last few words spoken to her. She couldn't initiate a conversation. She could only echo.
And when Narcissus rejected her, she faded away until only her voice remained.
Yes, and this gives us some very specific psychiatric terms regarding schizophrenia, doesn't it?
It does.
In schizophrenia and catatonia, we see symptoms called echolalia, repeating words, and echopraxia, which is repeating movements.
So these clinical terms for severe mental detachment are named after that heartbroken nymph who lost her selfhood.
Exactly. It reframes the patient not as crazy, but as someone who has lost their own voice, just like Echo.
It makes these medical terms feel so much more human. It's like the patient is trapped in the myth.
That is Dr. Dinsman's whole goal, to show the humanity inside the pathology. Take epilepsy, for example. In the past, it was sometimes called morbus Heracles, the disease of Hercules.
Hercules, the strong guy with the lion skin. I thought he was a hero.
He was, but a tragic one. Hercules represents what was known as the epileptic character. He had massive strength, but he was prone to these sudden, confused fits of rage. There's a horrific story where, in a fugue state, a madness sent by Hera, he kills his own wife and children.
Whoa, that takes the Disney version of Hercules and just throws it out the window.
Completely. And when he wakes up, he has no memory of it, only deep, crushing remorse. Dr. Dinsman uses this to explain the old concept of epileptic aggression, the sudden storm followed by guilt.
So it reframes the patient not just as a sick person, but as someone grappling with a heroic but destructive energy they can't control.
A heavy burden to carry, yes.
It reminds me of the Oedipus complex. I mean, we can't talk about psychology without mentioning Freud's favorite.
Torsus. Oedipus, the king who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. And Electra, the daughter who conspired to kill her mother to avenge her father.
We usually think of these just as wanting to sleep with your mom or whatever, but Dr. Dinsman frames it more about destiny. Yeah.
Yes, it's with a fatalistic struggle. Oedipus tries everything to avoid his fate, but his very attempts to escape are what lead him to it. It mirrors the neurotic patient who creates the very misery they're trying to run from.
You try so hard to control your world again, that desire to be God, that you end up creating the tragedy you feared.
And that's the core of it.
So we've covered the mind and the struggle for power. Let's move to, well, soul, sex, and meaning. Because even the word psychiatry has a myth in it.
It does. Psyche means soul. But Psyche was also a specific figure in mythology. She was a mortal woman so beautiful that Eros, the god of love and desire, fell in love with her.
This is the story of the lamprey. I love this one because it speaks to the conflict between faith and science.
It is beautiful. Eros hides Psyche away in a palace, but he sets a rule. She can never see his face. She has to love him in the dark.
Which represents the mystery of the divine, or maybe the mystery of the unconscious. You have to trust it without seeing it.
But Psyche is human. She's curious. She wants to analyze it.
She seeks knowledge.
So one night, while Eros is sleeping, she lights a lamp to look at him. She sees he's a beautiful god, not a monster. But in her excitement, she spills a drop of hot oil on his shoulder.
And he wakes up and leaves.
He flees. Love cannot live where there is no trust, he says. But the deeper meaning Dinsman points to is the relationship between the soul, Psyche, and desire, Eros. The soul has to go through trials, suffering, tasks, journeying into the underworld to be reunited with love.
It's a metaphor for the therapeutic process itself.
Exactly. When you shine the light of analysis on your feelings, sometimes they flee. You have to work hard to integrate them back.
And speaking of unions, we have to talk about hermaphroditism. Biologically, we know what this means, having characteristics of both sexes, but the myth is, well, it's intense.
It is. It involves Hermaphroditos, the son of Hermes and Aphrodite. He was a beautiful young man. A water nymph named Salmachus saw him bathing and fell madly in love. She grabbed him and prayed to the gods that they would never be parted.
Be careful what you wish for.
Indeed. The gods answered her prayer literally. They fused their bodies together. Two became one half man, half woman.
Oh.
It explains the biological anomaly through a story of obsessive, consuming love. It warns us that trying to completely merge with another person to lose your individuality is a kind of curse.
It seems like so much of this comes down to balancing forces. You have the soul and desire, man and God, and Dr. Dinsman brings up another pair, Eros and Thanatos.
The life drive and the death drive. Freud talked about this, but it's rooted in myth. Eros is creativity, binding things together, life. Thanatos is destruction, death, returning to nothingness.
And mental illness is when one of these takes over.
Exactly. A healthy mind balances the two. But if Thanatos takes the wheel, you get depression, suicide, aggression. If Eros runs wild without check, you might get mania or obsession.
Which leads us to the ultimate question of meaning. If we're just balancing these drives and if we're like Kishi trying to build a world that might choke us, what's the point? If we killed God to gain consciousness, what do we do with the emptiness? Dr. Dinsman ends with Sisyphus.
Sisyphus, the man condemned to roll a giant rock up a hill, only to watch it roll back down and then do it again.
Yeah.
Forever.
It sounds like the worst torture imaginable. It sounds like a metaphor for modern life. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat.
It does. But Dr. Dinsman, aligning with existentialist thinkers like Camus, reframes this. He suggests we shouldn't see Sisyphus as a victim. Sisyphus is the human condition. We all have our rock. We all have our repetitive struggles.
So how's that a good thing?
Because Sisyphus accepts it. He finds meaning in the struggle. He defies the gods not by escaping the rock, but by being happy despite it. His consciousness, his awareness of his fate, makes him superior to the rock.
So as long as he keeps pushing, he's alive. He's asserting his existence.
He becomes his own master.
Wow. So we started with Kishi almost choking on the earth to create his own world, a failed attempt to replace God, and we end with Sisyphus pushing that earth up a hill to find his own meaning. A successful attempt to live without God.
It's a perfect circle. Dr. Dinsman's work shows us that we haven't outgrown our myths, we've just renamed them. The struggle of the atheist, the believer, the patient, and the doctor is the same struggle that started when Kishi dove into the water.
So let's wrap this up. We've unpacked a lot today. We learned that the collective unconscious is the software running our minds. We saw how the Turkish myth of Kishi and the Greek myth of Prometheus tell the exact same story of human rebellion against the divine.
And how that rebellion is the source of both our civilization and our anxiety. And we've seen that our clinical terms, panic, narcissism, phobia, are not sterile labels. They are ancient gods that still rule our behaviors.
Dr. Dinsman's message seems to be that you can't treat the human mind just with chemistry. You have to understand the story it's trying to tell.
Precisely. Whether you call it libido or eros, whether you call it anxiety or pan, you are dealing with the same fundamental forces. We are not just biological machines. We are the carriers of these ancient stories.
It changes how you look at a diagnosis. It's not just a disorder. It's a myth playing out in real time.
And realizing that can be the first step to mastering it.
So here is the thought I want to leave you with today. If our modern psychiatric diagnoses are just scientific names for ancient gods, which God is currently ruling your life, and more importantly, are you the Kishi choking on the world you're trying to build because you want to be the creator? Or are you Sisyphus, finding happiness in the simple act of pushing the rock? Thanks for listening to this deep dive.